Welcome to another edition of the Basketball Teacher Podcast. Our mission is to bring you discussions on a wide array of topics in the coaching world to grow players on and off the court. You can connect with us on YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter, and also reach us directly through email at basketballteacherpodcast@gmail.com. Now, here's your host, Coach Mike Hernandez.
Welcome back, and thanks again for joining us wherever you are and on whatever platform you are listening to us. Your support, as always, is so greatly appreciated. We're here to bring you another topical episode about tryouts. By the time this episode gets released, coaches will be in their preseason work with tryouts rapidly approaching. So this episode serves to give young coaches some ideas for preseason and tryouts, as well as give veteran and experienced coaches the opportunity to reflect on their own practices. So to help share their insight on this topic, I'm very happy to be joined by Coach Brad Stamps. Coach, how are you today?
I'm doing good. How are you, Coach?
Doing great, and really looking forward to getting into this. I know as we're talking right now, we're getting close to getting into the season, the full swing of things with tryouts before we know it coming up. So really looking forward to getting into this. So Coach, let's go ahead and get started with introduction to yourself, your coaching journey. Where is the game taking you? Where are you at right now? And what's kind of been the journey in between?
You bet. Be glad to do that. I'm at Fayetteville High School in Arkansas. I'm actually about, maybe a sand wedge from the University of Arkansas campus. Fayetteville High School is special to me because that's where I went to high school. I graduated from Fayetteville High School years ago, and I've obviously started coaching in the Fayetteville district, and then that led me to other places. I had a stint at Shiloh Christian in Springdale, a small private school, and I was there for 4 years. Left there, went to Springdale High School for 6, and then now I'm back home at my alma mater and looking forward to doing some things here at a place that means so much to me. So, as we're moving through this and progressing through this, I know in a pandemic, every state is a little different right now with school and what that looks like and athletics itself. I know many states are not participating yet in athletics, but we are, our football team, our volleyball team, and everybody's playing right now. So we look like we're going to have a season, and so we're just preparing and getting ready for what that looks like.
Yeah, fingers crossed that everyone's able to stay safe and that hopefully you're able to have a season to the best of your ability. I'm really hoping that happens. I want to touch on you going back to your alma mater real quick, because I feel like a lot of coaches who I talk to, they always talk about, a lot of them talk about like the journey coming back home or having the opportunity to be in their home area or in their home school. So what about that experience has been so special to you to be able to go back to your alma mater and work there?
Yeah, it's really neat for me and for my mentor. When I graduated from high school, I went and played college basketball and came back, didn't really know what I wanted to do. And so the coach that coached me when I was a freshman at Woodland Junior High was still in place at Woodland. And that's one of our feeder schools for our high school. And so I went back to him and just said, hey, I'm not sure what I want to do, but I think I want to get into coaching. And so he asked me to volunteer. I volunteered and instantly fell in love with the game. I was with him for a few years and then, moved up to the high school assistant. And then once I was gone for 10 years, coaching at other places, my same coach, the mentor, was the head coach at Fayetteville High School. He had moved up to the high school by then, and he was towards the end of his career. And he called on a whim one day and said, hey, my assistant's leaving. Would you want to come back and be with me by my side for the next couple of years and then take over the program when I leave? I told him no the first couple of times. We were coming off a state championship game at Springdale High. I had a good group coming back. My career was kind of, in my opinion, was kind of, elevating at that point in time, I guess you should say. And to come back and be an assistant was, even though it was intriguing, it was one of those things that, you know, I just felt like I didn't want to do that. After a couple of weeks, he called again, and I really started asking some tough questions as to, when you say you're close to retirement, does that mean 1 year, 2 years, 5 years? What does that look like? Does it guarantee me the opportunity when you leave? Will they open it up? All those questions that anybody would ask.
Right.
And so as I started looking into it, you know, and soul searched about it, it just made sense to me. It made sense in a lot of ways. One, you know, the guy who's taught you the game of basketball was not only a basketball coach for me, but a life coach. Calling on you saying, hey, I'm fixing to get out of this game. And what an opportunity to pay it forward for me to serve him, to make sure, you know, he was successful and enjoy the last few years. He brought me into the game, so I felt like I needed to go back and serve, and it obviously worked out. You know, we had a good little couple years together. I cherish those memories and those moments again with him, and now I've had the opportunity. This will be year 2 for me as the head coach back at my alma mater.
It sounds like not only a wonderful opportunity for you, but I can imagine for that coach as well, the feeling of having, you know, a former player, you know, come back and be part of the fold and everything. I can imagine that must have been really rewarding for everybody involved for that situation to take place the way that it did. So yeah, that's great. So with our episode today being focused on tryouts, let's start with, when does the preseason for you technically start? When do you start turning the page and start thinking about preseason activities for the upcoming basketball year?
Yeah, sure. I'll walk you through that. Now, when I say all these things, it's changed because of the pandemic.
Yep.
But most years, what we try to do is we have a spring tryout, you know, for the following year. We usually do those right after spring break, the last week of March, first week of April. And then we have a few weeks of off season with those guys as the school year is winding down, and then a summer camp where we go to 2 or 3 team camps, maybe, and get to know each other and build some chemistry and get some games. This year, with the way you know, everything just came to an abrupt end in March, you know, everything was pushed back. And so our tryout looked a little different for us. We did one right before school started, the first week of August, where we, you know, had those, and this was all grades, 7th through 12th. Our junior highs as well as our middle schools had tryouts during those couple of days. And so we picked our team, and then typically, it hadn't changed. This part hasn't changed. Once school starts, we begin in the weight room 3 days a week. We do our conditioning program. That's kind of the way our year is set up. Where August and September, we're really working on our bodies. We're really working on our basketball skills and our conditioning. And that leads us into October, where, you know, once the calendar turns to October, it's go time. And that's when we start getting our team ready for our season in November.
Right. And when you mentioned the spring tryout, so is that something for returning players who come to get their, you know, tryout about what they're going to be doing for the upcoming year? What entails your spring tryout?
It's a great question. Every kid that played the previous year in our program must go through a tryout again. And then we open it up for anybody else as well. So, you know, an example, I had 3 returning varsity players this year. We graduated some and had 1 leave. And so and I usually keep around 16 to 18 varsity players on the roster. And so we had 37 try out for those 16 to 18 spots. And obviously we have a sophomore team and a JV team where we had many more. We had close to 70, I think, players try out for those 3 teams. So, you know, we require everybody to go through the same process. There's not really a save. If, say, you're a junior and then you were on the team as a sophomore and junior, you still must go through a tryout to make a basketball team your senior year. It's just kind of the way we do things.
And when you go through that tryout in the spring, are there certain things that you're looking from certain returning players, or is it a standard type of tryout that everybody goes through in the spring, or are there certain things that you want, maybe you're looking at for certain players to
Sure.
have improved on?
No, I think a combination of that. Obviously, I feel pretty good about the three returning starters for our varsity, but they're still held to the same standard. We're still going to put every kid that is at our tryout is going to go through a series of drill, skill work, ball handling, passing, shooting, individual defense, and then, as you know, sometimes those individual skills are obviously important, and you want to look at those, but you want to see them in a game situation because some kids shine with, whether it's intangibles, a guy that's going to chase down every loose ball that may not grade well in a skill work, but those guys are so valuable, and so you look for different things.
Mm. And I think that's important with those spring tryouts of returning players, is that you probably know your guys, what they hopefully have improved on throughout the season, or things that you're hoping that they're continue to have worked on, and then, like you said, in those game situations, there's a lot more that you can learn about a player based on the way that they kind of perform in those game type situations, like you mentioned, with the
Sure.
intangibles and with those other maybe things that can't be assessed necessarily in a workout or in a drill. Um, so yeah, it makes a lot of sense. I am going to touch on a little bit later about the amount of players that you keep, because I know that's a little bit
Yeah.
unique, but I'll put a pin in that. And then really
Yeah.
quickly for the summer work, I know that there's a couple different philosophies about how summer's conducted. I know some coaches are very much into playing as many games as they possibly can and getting into as many tournaments as they can, while others are more focused on skill work and team bonding. For
hmm
your summer program, what is the kind of makeup for that?
Yeah, like I mentioned earlier, once we get our team, usually the 1st of April, after tryouts, and we've got our new roster. Like I said, we spend the month of April and May, and it's not really, I wouldn't say it's necessarily a team practice where we're trying to install offense or those type of things. It's more, weight room, skill work. And then once we get into the school is out in May, our June is filled up. I say filled up. We usually go to 2 different team camps on college campuses. We do that for various reasons. One, I want our kids seen on a college campus. 2, we go to places that we don't see those teams normally in a regular season for us. So we're seeing different people and different style of play and different competitions. It's more or less a stress-free environment for the kids and our staff because we don't put a great emphasis on, being spectacular and winning games as much as we do the things you talked about earlier, which are important. That's building team chemistry. We're away, we're staying at a hotel for a couple of days, and we try to, when we're not playing games in the team camp, we try to, maybe go to a movie or go out to dinner or bowling or something to get away, but we're there together, and I think that time is valuable. We do that in June, and then we have a mandated by our state a dead period where we have 2 weeks, the week before July 4th and then the week of July 4th every year, where we can't even open our doors to our gym. The kids can't be on campus. We can't be on campus as coaches. I think it's good. And then, with our kids, we have several that play AAU, and they're involved heavily in July. That's a heavy month for them. My personal philosophy, I'm not saying it's right or wrong, but it's always worked for me. I don't want to see our kids in July, and I tell them that. I want you to go be a kid. I want you to enjoy, going to the lake with your family, going to hang out at the pool, get away completely from the game. Now, like I said earlier, the higher level kids are playing AAU, but as a general rule for us, we don't do any team meetings or things at all in July. I want them to get away from it. And then we come back the first Monday of August and kind of get started again.
Well, you and I are kind of right on board with that because we don't do anything with our girls in July either. So July is
Right.
that's their month. You know, we'll do a lot of work in the summer in June and everything, but then come July, it's their time. Like you said, like be a kid and do some other things and kind of recharge a little bit and come back to it when the school year starts. And then I think of what you mentioned with the summer work that you did. I think part of that is also kind of just a unique experience. Like you said, it's an experience that they'll probably remember and they'll enjoy. And it's a little bit less in the emphasis on, like you said, about the winning games or things like that, but the team bonding and just getting them into a different sort of environment than they might normally be in. And so that sounds like a good experience for them. And then right before we get into tryouts, because I know a couple coaches ask about this, you mentioned about your conditioning program and things within the weight room that you do, working on their bodies in August and September. For players that are in a fall sport like football or a sport
Right.
like that, are you worried about anything like that? Or is your philosophy that they're doing a sport and so they're doing what they need to do? Or is there anything unique that goes for those players playing a fall sport?
Yeah, if they're in a fall sport, that's first priority. And we don't mess particularly with making sure that they're with us because we know and it should be that way. Their sole emphasis is on that sport that they're in, whatever in season sport it is, and they don't need distractions of us with that. Obviously, if they want to get some free throws in or they want to, get in the gym without playing, but just, with a ball in their hands, we allow that with the understanding that, if a game breaks out or there's a pickup game, you're not playing in the game because, every kid wants to compete. And so that's just kind of the way we do it with those kids. We know they're getting, hopefully they're getting good conditioning. They're getting the weights from that other sport. So they're getting some good out of it.
Yeah, and I think that having that philosophy is helpful to let them do their fall sport because when you're in basketball season, you want their full attention and their full commitment and don't want them necessarily feeling like they're being pulled by other sports or other things that are going on. So I
And I
think that
think
that
that's important, Coach. I think I've been fortunate. I've worked at some different schools, but I've been fortunate to work with some football coaches that we sit down as soon as before the summer sets out, and we have a kid's calendar, and if it's a multi-sport kid, and we really do our best to not maybe match dates. Say they go to a
mm,
7-on-7 or they go to a basketball camp. We don't want to put a kid or a parent in a situation where they have to choose. So we want to manage their schedule to where they don't have to choose, and they can be a part of multiple programs if they choose.
and just from some conversations that I've had with coaches, even on this podcast, I found that there are coaches who are really, really successful, and one of the common threads I feel like I've noticed is that all the other coaches in the school are kind of working together, and like everybody's kind of on the same page, and the coaches all kind of support each other. They collaborate, like you mentioned, and in the end, you can tell that those coaches who work together, they have the best interest of the kid and the families in mind, because like you said, they're not trying to double up or trying to pull kids into their sport over another sport. And just kind of feels like everybody's working together in some of those real successful programs. And so I do think that that's really important, like you mentioned, to not be stepping on other people's toes and not feeling like they're going to step on yours, and just having that open communication and that collaboration. That makes perfect
Right.
sense. So now when it actually comes to tryouts, so more on a philosophical level, what is your philosophy for conducting tryouts now, and how has it changed over the years? Are there things that you've done away with, or there's things that you've stayed consistent with over time?
Yeah, we really want to, and I'll go through not just the skill, but I'll go through the structure of what our tryout looks like. We have our middle school coaches come over. We also have our junior high, our freshman coaches, as well as my high school staff. And so we try to, whatever our number is for that specific tryout, we try to uh, group them into stations. We'll have a ball handling station. We'll have a shooting station. We'll have a passing station. We'll have a defensive station. And so I try to pair a coach, maybe two coaches up with each station, and they're running that specific station in that drill. We'll station them through, for that first hour of a tryout. And then the second hour, we try to maybe do some competition as well as, some 3-on-3 or some 5-on-5 games to catch the intangibles. And so, with those specific skill sets, we want to grade a player out. When I say grade them out, it's kind of a checkbox type deal where we have each coach has a sheet with every kid and their uniform number that they have on for that specific tryout. And so they're going through as they're in their station, and they're marking, giving them a grade on specific skills. And then at the end of our session with that tryout, we have I would say a war room, and sometimes it gets a little intense because, there's several coaches in there making decisions. Our program with our staff it's a collective responsibility. It's not me. This is the way I'm going to do it, and you guys are going to follow suit. That's not how we do things. It's a collective responsibility where we respect each other's opinions and input. So we, through that war room and through each coach's checklist, we come up with a roster. And then we, later in the week, this year it was on a Wednesday, our tryout. And so on Friday, our athletic department, they post the list on the athletic website for parents and kids to get on there, and they can see who made the rosters.
And when you talk about grading them out and assessing them, have you found in your experience that you and your staff do have like similar things that you are looking for, similar philosophies? I know you mentioned it gets a little bit heated. Have you found that there's cohesion and then they kind of have the same philosophy for what they're looking for, or have you found that maybe what one coach looks for in shooting and when they're grading is a lot different than another? How does that kind of work out?
Yeah, another good question, because, I do believe that, without going on into this, because we could spend a whole Zoom session or recording just on your staff and the makeup of your staff and the differences. But I've been blessed with our staff, and I'll quickly hit on that just because this leads into what I was going to say. But Ronnie Brewer, who a lot of you are familiar with, played at Fayetteville. I coached him 7th, 8th, and 9th at the Woodland Junior High, and then 10th, 11th, 12th when I moved up to the high school. Obviously, he went on to Arkansas and was an All-American and was a lottery pick in the NBA. And so when I took the job, he hit me up and wanted to come back and coach at his alma mater. And, of course, how are you going to say no to that? A young man who means a lot to our community. So he's on my staff. The other assistant coach, Nikki Bradford, played at Fayetteville High School, was a Gatorade Player of the Year, went to Kansas and played for Roy Williams, went overseas, and now he wanted to come back with me on my alma mater. So the makeup of our staff, we all played at Fayetteville High School. We all grew up in Fayetteville. And so you throw in Jeff Bogart and Jordan Rose, who are my freshman coaches who've been in the district for multiple years now. It's a cohesion. It's a group that we have similar philosophies. And we, for the most part, we sell out to each other on, okay, how can we make sure that, when we leave a war room, that we're all on the same page and the kids don't ever see us differ outside of when we're there, because I think that's important as well, that we're all on the same page. And so the war room, when I say gets heated, it does, just because, there may be a situation where one of the coaches, they may have a player that wasn't on anybody else's list, and that's their time to defend, debate. And, so at the end of the day, we feel like, when I say collective responsibility, that we've done our due diligence, and every single player that plays has eyes on him, multiple eyes during that tryout. And they have coaches that will defend them, debate them, and then, at the end of the day, when we post a roster, we're okay with that. And we've done what we had to do.
Right. And I really like the part about kind of having that unified front. I think it's so important that, as adults, you can have the conversations you need to have behind closed doors and disagree and air out whatever you need to, but then that conversation stays in that room, and that when it's time
Yeah,
to present yourself in front of your kids, that you're unified and that you're
yeah,
together. Because I know in my experience that whether it's as a student or just as a younger athlete, I could pick up on that right away if there was tension between coaches or tension between adults. And it's, yeah, your kids will notice and your athletes will notice if you're not
no
unified.
doubt.
And it already kind of sets a tough precedent. With that with that idea of grading and doing
Yeah.
the skills and then the competition, is that something you've always done, or is that something you've sort of adapted and changed over time?
Yeah, I would say it probably has changed a little bit in just the amount of time you spend, in each category. In the years past, maybe we played more,
Mm,
to where, we put them on teams, and whether that's 3-on-3, the FIBA 3-on-3, or whether that's, 5-on-5 games, we've probably spent more time on that over the years. And so I just felt like, and my previous coach, my mentor, as I told you before, his philosophy was similar in the fact that he wanted to see, make sure we hit on all the skills to be a player. And so we spent more time setting up those stations, to where we could really man that a lot easier with smaller groups.
right. No, that I think that having some form of assessment, though, it is really
Yeah,
important, and I can see the value of it, because I can imagine, and we're going to touch on this in a little bit, that if you have a crowded gym of players, it's you got to have, I feel like, some system
yeah,
to be able to be like, oh, okay, that was what I had for that player. Okay, I remember that this is what I wrote down for that player. I think it's just really helpful to just have that information there, so you're not just going off of memory. And when you are grading, is that process still taking place during the competition? Are you just kind of doing the eye test? So when players are competing in that second hour, is there still a grading philosophy, or no with that?
yeah, no doubt. It's, when I say stations, every kid is going to be seen by every coach, in those stations, because,
Hmm.
if it's 6 minute, 8 minute, whatever we do with those stations, they're rotating throughout the three facilities that we have, and they're with a different two coaches every time they rotate stations. And so every kid's going to be seen. And it's, like I said earlier, it's going to be a collective responsibility of those coaches, to grade what they see. There's no bias, because they're not seeing another coach's list
Hmm.
beforehand. They're not seeing his grading system, and so we don't ever see, what the other coaches, have, until we get to the war room. But yes, we grade them specifically during the skill work, and then once we play, it's more of a note taking. I may see a young man, dive on the floor for a loose ball, or, step over and help defense and take a charge in a 5-on-5 game. And obviously those things jump off the charts. And they may have not have graded well, in the skill work, like I said earlier, but golly, he's making winning plays once he gets in a team setting. So, that's a big deal.
Yeah, and I think you can learn a lot, and we just talked about this a little bit earlier. Just you can learn so much from just watching them play, and you can see kind of that, I don't say like gamer mentality, or the mentality
Yeah.
that they take and the intangibles that they bring when they have a game. Because I've seen experiences before where, even unfortunately, the opposite end, where players can do pretty well with skill work, but then they shrink or
Yeah.
don't necessarily demonstrate that in a game type setting. So I think having both of those kind of gives you a perspective on how they do on both ends. Um, we're kind of alluding to this answer and with this next question, but for coaches who have crowded gyms come tryouts, how would you recommend that those coaches best assess a group of players that maybe they've never seen before, they don't know anything about, and it's just this huge crowded gym of players? I'm assuming that the grading system would be good, and then dividing up in players amongst different coaches. Are there any other tips or tricks that you would recommend for coaches to assess a crowded gym of players that maybe they don't even know?
No, I would say there definitely needs to be a system, whatever that system is, because it can be a little overwhelming, whenever you're at a tryout and all of a sudden you look up and you're like, wow, we've got twice as many kids as we thought we would. Do we have the gym space? One, are we able to function and do this the right way? And so we set up a pre-registration for our tryouts 3 to 4 weeks before tryouts, and we post it every day on our social media platforms, whether it's our athletic website, our Twitter, basketball Twitter account, Facebook, Instagram. We put all these out so the kid and the parent can go early and put their name, their address, what school they attend, whether it's one of our middle schools or whatever. If it's that specific tryout, a sophomore coming up, it has all kinds of information, and so they get an opportunity. It gives us an opportunity, I should say, to post a distribution list that we can print out from that pre-registration beforehand and then place in groups. So when they come in and check in, when they get to the gym, we have our coaches, our freshman coaches, sitting there with the pre-registration link where they can pull up the kid and say, okay, you start station number 1 today. And it's just easier to man it that way for us. We found it's been successful for us. So, if you don't have a pre-registration link or you don't do that, because you're still going to have kids that don't do the pre-registration that show up, but it's a little easier when you already know the kids beforehand that you've placed in groups that you can just add to those.
And I think that having some sort of, whether it's a pre-registration system or something that's going on before tryouts, I also think that gives you good insight if you're like a new coach in a program, about the players who are invested in the players who are interested in the players who are committed to it, because those are the ones who'll be knocking down your door in August and in September asking about basketball and asking about what's going on. And you can probably tell, okay, these are the ones that are committed and they're ready to get to work. And so I think that would be helpful. And so go ahead.
I'm sorry. I think the other thing that's important to that piece is, because I didn't hit on this earlier, but let's say we do our tryout, in the spring. This specific year, we, like I said, we did it before school started. We also, the second week of school, offer a second tryout for any kid that might have moved in the district, because oftentimes we have families that, for whatever reason, move in late. And so we give those kids and those families an opportunity to try out as well if they moved into the district. We don't bring any kids back to a second tryout that went through a first tryout. So those tend to be a little smaller, most of the time.
And then I'm thinking with that, it also, as an added benefit, it really does make your program, it's very visible. Like, you're very communicative, you're very open about everything. Like, it doesn't seem like there's much guesswork for players as to what's going on or when things are, when tryouts are happening and things like that. It seems like something that's benefited you and your program is using like social media and using these different types of outlets to really clearly communicate when all of these different things are happening. And that way I feel like it also takes away some of the confusion from the players, because they know where to look or they know where to go to in order to get that information. Am I correct in thinking that?
Yeah, for sure. We, our freshman coaches run our social media accounts for us. And so if there's something that I see or I want, I send it to them and then they post it out. It goes through multiple platforms. And so, I don't think, and it doesn't matter what you're doing. I always believe in several communication factors that go into things.
Yeah. And just being as clear and concise and precise as possible, I'm sure is just a benefit for everybody.
Yeah.
And so we touched on the process of deciding who who makes the team, and you mentioned about the war room and the discussions that you have with your staff. And so I'm what I am gathering from your answers and the conversation we've had so far is that you very much value and need the input from those on your staff in order for it to be like a collaborative process about who's choosing the team. Has that
Mhm.
always been a philosophy that you've had, getting input from everybody from your staff and feeling like everybody's included in the process, or is that something you've more developed over time?
No, it's always been that way, because multiple eyes are better than just two. When you're seeing several kids play, there has been there's been some changing of some minds once we got to the war room itself, where maybe a coach, or say myself, did not have a kid on my list, but the rest of the coaches or a couple of the other coaches were like, "Did you see so and so today? I felt like he was really good at going to his left and playing off 2 feet and making a play." Where maybe I didn't see that in my specific station or even when they played in the games. And so I think it's important, whatever the number of eyes that you have, always helps.
Yeah, I think that it also is a benefit to making your staff feel more invested into the team and into the program when they know that their input is valued and they know that
Yeah.
things that they say are going to be taken into consideration. Because I think that a coach could, or assistant coach or JV coach, whatever the case may be, they could say something and suggest something, and then maybe the head coach will hear it, but then whether or not that coach is going to actually do something with that information, or make a decision based on that information, that's a totally different story. And so it sounds like to me, you are willing to take somebody on your staff, you're willing to take their word for something, like you mentioned earlier. Maybe you didn't see it, or maybe there was something that you missed, but if one of members of your staff says like, "No, I believe in this kid, I believe that this kid has the ability to make it," then it sounds like to me that you have that much trust in your staff.
I think trust is the biggest thing. The guys that are with you on a day to day, trust is so important. I think you can tie that into loyalty, as well. Those kind of go together, and so we spend a lot of time, when I'm doing my coaching staff's evaluations and when we're visiting. I want to make sure, because there's power in this, in my opinion, that not only are you sharing with your staff, that you value them, but I think it's important to share with them what you value in them. And so I think there's power in that, and I think there's growth in that, and we're all, want to be better. And so at the end of the day, we've got to trust each other that, through time and through our relationships, that, the trust is developed, and that without a doubt, we're all on the same page.
And you bring up a great point about the idea of trusting, but also what do you trust them with? I think that it's great to definitely say that you trust your staff and that you trust their input and everything. But then taking a step further, it's like, well, specifically, what are you trusting them with? Like, what are you letting them, give you input on, or what, you know, things do they have a say in? I think that's really important. It's kind of goes with the words as well as the action of what you're trusting them with. And so, yeah, that makes lots of sense. So now when tryouts are about to finish, and let me ask you really quickly, how long do tryouts usually take for you?
Yeah, in years past, we've done 2 days, and 2 hours. So that kid will get, 4 hours of tryout time to each day. This year we didn't do that, and so they had a 2.5 hour tryout, because our circumstance and our social distancing and all the things that go on
Mm-hmm.
with what all of us have gone through. It looked a little different as far as the amount of time, and so we went one day, the specific time.
Mm. And so when that process is finished, let's Let's first talk about the players who do make who make the team. I think you mentioned that you post it somewhere. Is that how you go about communicating with the players who make it?
Yeah, that specific has changed for me maybe over the years. Early in my career, first of all, I can tell you this: that is probably for me, especially, but from what I've heard from other coaches, that is the toughest, the hardest day, I would say, for us, other than, the last game of the season when you're having to tell seniors bye. But that specific, because you don't want to disappoint anybody. And, a tryout itself, you've got a kid that's investing his time and his energy, and then he comes up and that is not on the list or whatever. That's tough.
Yeah.
First couple of years, as soon as the tryout ended, we deliberated as coaches, and then I came out and with the kids still in place and read the list. And I don't know if that's the right thing to do. And so for us, we dismiss the kids when it's over with. We deliberate, and then when I talked about those social media, we don't put it on Twitter, we don't put it on Instagram, we don't put it on Facebook, because you know how that could turn out.
Oh yeah.
Our athletic department, it's a one place that they can go and pull up athletics, and then they can see a roster. It doesn't list the kids who tried out and didn't make it. It just has the active roster of what 2020, 2021 basketball season will look like.
And so for the players who make it, do you ever have situations where players think like, oh, I thought I was going to be like on varsity, but I'm not, or do you have situations like that where even players who make the team that you have to have conversations with about their role or about where they fit in?
Oh yeah, most certainly. Because there's, when I said earlier, we have a sophomore team, a JV team, a varsity team, and all three of those teams, with the exception of the sophomore team, I guess, is a blend. Your varsity roster is going to have sophomores, juniors, and seniors. Your JV could have sophomores and juniors. So we have a structure at our school where we have a sophomore basketball period. It's a class period where we can load that class up. And so in order to have that class, to justify having that class, I would say we keep more sophomores than any other group as far as a tryout to load them in that class period, and they really benefit from it because, they're pulled out and they have our staff for a class period to where we can, really spend a year of development with them and then giving them a schedule of games as well.
I think that sounds really helpful and sounds really useful, and it sounds like too that also kind of builds like cohesion and kind of builds like a little bit of camaraderie and some buy-in too, because like we kind of talked about a little bit, if they're willing to put in all that time, then hopefully that means that they're going to be committed to working hard and improving and really looking to make those leaps to get to their next level as well.
And it's the thing about it is, when a roster is made, you have a general idea of where a student is or a student athlete is placed within those rosters I talked about. That changes. That changes throughout the school year. That changes throughout the off season, where a young man maybe really has a good camp, and we feel like we have a specific need. He can move up and play there as well. So it works a lot of ways. Most of the time, you have a pretty good idea going in of I would say, the top end of your varsity. You have a pretty good idea who those are, but there's always spots to fill from other classes.
Right. And when it comes to cutting players or not having players who made the team, are you willing to have conversations with those individuals? Is there a process for those who want to know, like, oh, why didn't I make it, and so on? Because I know that's always tricky for coaches, is what do they do with those players who didn't make it?
Yeah. Yeah, we talked before, we dismissed the kids about that specific, thing, that just because you didn't make a basketball tryout this time, that doesn't mean you're a bad basketball player. That doesn't mean, you don't have basketball skills. Doesn't mean it's personal and that we don't, value you. It just happens to be, we've got 2,600 students in our high school. We're, a big high school. The competition is tough, and maybe there's somebody in front of you has matured quicker than you have, who's bigger and stronger than you right now. So, if it's important to you, don't give up on, just because you're not on a roster that's posted. Get the ball in your hands and spend some time and come back and try out, the next time. And we've had kids that didn't necessarily make it as a sophomore or a junior or a freshman, and then at some point, it was important enough to them to really improve their skills and go to work, and they used it as motivation and came back and ended up having a successful junior or senior year of high school basketball. So, we share that with them before they leave. Now, obviously, kids, they're going to be disappointed. When I talked about it's not fun for us, I'm sure it's not fun for a kid as well. And so, yeah, we've had some conversations post tryout with some young men. We had it this year. And so I think being upfront and honest and really sharing with them, first of all, what you saw that stood out, what they did really well, or maybe better than, I should say, than other skills, and then what they need to improve on in order to make, a basketball team in the future.
And I think those conversations can definitely go a long way. And like you said, just framing the conversation to where, you're not saying anything about the person as an individual or even as a player, but sometimes there's just somebody who's above you at that point. And that doesn't mean that can't change, or that doesn't mean that, in the future that situation can't be different. I mean, I've had the exact same experience. I've had a couple girls who weren't on my team at the beginning, and then they worked really hard and they tried out the next year and they're great. And a couple of them even told me that, that experience taught them that, some of the things you really want in life, you got to work really hard at, and you really have to put a lot of work in. And, it's great to have players, I think, like that, because then that's kind of an example of like, hey, like, I don't just say that you can possibly make it next year. Like, here's actual proof that of players who didn't make it and now they're here. And so just being really honest and really upfront. And I think kind of what you and I kind of both agree in is that, this conversation that you have, it's never a fun one. It's never an enjoyable one, but at least if you're being honest and you're being transparent, you kind of clear your conscience and you know that you said the right thing, and you're good to move forward after that.
Yeah, I think so. I think that's important.
And so I said I was going to get back to it, and so I am. One of the things that really stuck out about when you talked about your spring tryouts is the amount of varsity players that you keep. And I know that that's always a discussion about how many players to keep and how to make sure that people feel invested, and everybody from the last guy on the bench to the beginner, the first person out on the floor, all feel like they're a part of this team. And so you mentioned that you keep about 16 to 18 after those spring tryouts. What is your philosophy behind that, about keeping as many players as you do?
Yeah, when I say I keep 16 to 18, what I should have phrased that a little differently. Our varsity roster is 16 to 18. We obviously keep more than 16 to 18 players during our tryouts. What we tend to do, because I told you we have a class period, our sophomore group is usually the biggest group that we have. And so this year, I think we kept 18 sophomores, and they're all in that basketball period, the class period, even though there's a couple of those that will have a good opportunity, to play JV, maybe even varsity as a sophomore. And then what we try to do is from those 18 going into the next year, that's several times that's cut down from the 18 to maybe 12, maybe 10, somewhere in there. And then as seniors, when they're going from their junior to their senior year, maybe sometimes there's a cut again. Sometimes there's not, but several times there is. So it gets smaller. I think it's a big, group coming in, and then it gets smaller over the next couple of years for them.
And when you have that bigger group, you mentioned about like the sophomores, if you have like about 18 of them, is there a conversation that takes place with some of the players or with all of the players about like, hey, there's a lot of you and some of you might have the ability to move up? And is there also a conversation with some of them that, hey, like, you have a lot of work that you need to do in order to see the floor? Because I know that's always been a tough spot, even for me personally, was when you have maybe that player who, I'll take this player, but I don't know if they're really ever going to see the floor that much, and to have that honest conversation with them. So is there a process for that for you?
Yeah, and we do that several ways. We do that once the roster is made. We have that in our parent meeting to lead off the school year, and we tell those sophomore parents and those sophomore players, we had to fight to have this class period for development, because it is important. Bodies change, maturity changes from a sophomore to a junior, or a junior to a senior. And so, we want to spend this time really evaluating and giving you a year of developmental basketball, to where you're getting stronger, you're getting your skills. It doesn't, it doesn't guarantee you, just because you're on a sophomore basketball team, it doesn't guarantee you that you will continue through the program for 3 years, because like I told you before, there's competition on each level. And so, and then there's, just because you're on a sophomore roster doesn't mean you're staying on a sophomore roster. We have those conversations. You could move into the JV group that practices in the afternoons. And so there's a movement within them, but I think, like I said earlier, with the communication is key and vital to your program success, and making sure all your stakeholders are involved in that communication.
And then as a follow-up to that question, do you do those sort of parent meetings or those types of meetings with your varsity players as well? Or are those certain things also communicated? Because I know that some coaches have that as well with varsity players, where they might have a player who's, at the end of the bench, and they might not necessarily see that time, but then that's also communicated to them. So what is that conversation like with your varsity players as well?
Yeah, it's the same, and we do that once the roster, we do that individually with kids on our roster, especially on our varsity roster, where we bring them in and tell them, this is where we see you fitting in right now, as of this day, as a staff. And so in order to maximize what you can bring to the table, this is where you've really got to spend some time. We've got to see you be able to do this, this, and this in order to get on the floor. But then in the parent meeting, it's I would say it's not as specific, but it's more broad, that we're going to spend this off-season camp coming up with where we feel like a young man can help us best. And so I think just sharing with them that it is a process. It's not just, a one-time, one size fits all type deal where, okay, this is where you're at, this is where you're going to stay, here we go. There's movement throughout, and I think it has to be that way. I think a kid has to feel like, if I'm really having success or I'm working my tail off, that coaches are going to believe me enough to where, they can move me to a varsity spot, or they can move me to it. And I want it to stay that way, because I think the day-to-day competition is really good when there's opportunity for growth within a season.
It's kind of like a little tryouts going on throughout the whole season. Where players are always feeling like they're kind of trying out or trying to show what they can do and everything like that. Yeah, that's great.
And I don't know how many times, coach, during practice, even, when we share if we're matched up one-on-one, or we're doing, alley drill, or whatever we're doing, or it's a competition within a group. we share with them, your job should be, or your mindset, I should say, every day you walk out that locker room door to the practice floor is, I'm going to win a job today. And, you know, I think it has to be that way. If you're setting up your practices where the kids are engaged and they're competitive, you know, it should be that way. This is real world. This is real life. And, you know, you mentioned it earlier that the game of basketball or any sport teaches so many valuable lessons. And what an unbelievable opportunity for us as coaches to build those within our day-to-day, those opportunities for those kids to see that if I'm at my best today, not only is it going to benefit me, but it's going to benefit our team. And it's going to push your teammate to be better.
Yeah, and kids love competition. Kids love competing, and kids will rise to that challenge. Like you said, if they'll enjoy it, they'll enjoy competing. It's like I said, they're winning. It's like their job, you know, like you're trying to show out and show up your absolute best. And yeah, that's great. So before we get to our concluding segment, something I want to touch on, because you mentioned it a couple times, and so I want to kind of re-emphasize this, which is your communication with parents and with the community. It seems to be very transparent and seems to be very open. So can you touch on that really quickly for those listening, what the importance is to be communicative with parents and be open with parents and keep them involved in the discussion?
Yeah. Well, I mean, without a doubt, if you don't, if you're not one of those that likes to share or likes to get mass communication out, you're going to be spending most of your time being miserable with answering emails or answering phone calls or all those things, because I've seen it. I've seen other coaches that they struggle with that piece. And, you know, and so I would say for us is, you know, whether it's every Sunday, and I require even our middle school coaches that are our feeder coaches, one of the biggest things for me is I make sure they understand the importance of that. And so every Sunday night during the school year, that coach is posting what the next week looks like, you know, so those parents can plan a week in advance and see, you know. So for instance, hey, Tuesday's picture day, or hey, Wednesday, you know, we're doing a team function afterwards. We put everything detailed for them, for that parent, in a mass email on Sunday nights to those parents, and all of our kids are always, you know, on the same page for that week.
Yeah, and like you mentioned about if you're not in that open level of communication, you're going to be, like you said, answering emails. You're going to be consistently doing all of these other things, and I know that it's a tough part of the job sometimes is having all those conversations and making sure that you're open with parents. But I think one of the conversations I had earlier with a coach was about how, you know, you're running a program. You're not just necessarily coaching basketball. And that entails, you know, all the communication pieces and all the other things that aren't necessarily basketball related. But then, as you kind of mentioned, if you're doing all those things and if you're being open and you're being transparent with your communication with parents and the community members, it's actually going to save you a lot of time on the other end, because you're not having to react and having to go back and try and maybe put out all these fires later.
Sure.
So no, that's.
And I think it's just being available, you know, for your people, you know, and I share with them, you know, you can always get in touch with me if it's after 8 p.m. during the school week or whatever. Try not to. You can email me then, but try not to call, because there's a certain point where, you know, there's other things going on in your life that, you know, but for the most part, they also understand that we're available for your son. You know, if he's got something going on that you're sharing with me, the first line is that young man having the trust and an opportunity to come in and just sit down with you with the door shut and listening as a coach. And so those are, to be honest, that's probably more rewarding, I think, for a coach or a staff, is to, once you see that trust and that relationship that means so much to that young man, to have the ability to, at any time, to, coach, something's bothering me, let's sit down and talk. I think I think that's probably more important than any other piece, is that relationship between the young man and coach, or young lady and coach.
And they'll probably remember that the rest of their life too, is that you were
Yeah, they
able to have
will.
that.
They will, and I think it's important to share that with your parents in your parent meeting, that, you know, before you reach out, or before you go over the top, maybe to a principal or somebody else on something that's going on, give your young man the opportunity to come in, and we can, most times, we can solve it between coach and player, and have a respect amongst each other, because we looked each other in the eye, and we're honest, and there's value once again in that for that young man, setting them up for the future, when they're in front of their boss, or they're in front of somebody else. They've developed those skills to really verbalize what's going on, but then, you know, for us to be able to listen.
Yeah, I think that's a great skill for them to learn, to be able to advocate for themselves and articulate whatever their concern is, whatever their problem is. Like you mentioned, it's going to serve them really well in the future. So 100% agreed. All right, Coach, to wrap up, there's a couple questions that I ask every guest. So we'll start with this first one here. What is a coaching moment from your career that you think others listening would be able to learn from?
That's a great question. You know, and you kind of put me on the spot with it, to be honest with you, because there's probably several, and I know once we finish this, I'll think of something that I probably wish I would have said. But, you know, I don't know specifically what comes to mind, other than, you know, I think, you know, kids can change. Kids can, I've seen some opportunities where we had a young man, and I won't say names, but a young man in our program that had some baggage, that had some things that were, you know, he had a really successful sophomore year, then got involved in some things, and you know, we had to dismiss him with the understanding that, hey, look, you know, we're going to continue to gauge what you're doing off the floor. We're going to continue to see what your grades are. He was devastated. You know, he was an all-state player as a sophomore, and then all of a sudden the coach is taking the game away from him. And it was more of a challenge. It was more of dangle a carrot and see. And I was shocked, completely shocked, to be honest with you. Whenever, you know, I start checking up, and then he comes back and was an all-state player for us his senior year, defied the odds, because most people would have counted him out and the things that he was involved with, and led us to a state championship game, a state runner-up finish. And so those type of things, you know, just right off the top of my head jump to mind, just because it would have been real easy, you know, to just, hey, you're finished, and give up on him. I think he was a young man that probably needed us, you know, but we needed him as well. And so giving him an opportunity to prove himself, giving him an opportunity to show that, you know, I can change, and if it's important enough to me, I'm going to make these changes in my life to be successful.
Yeah, that's wonderful, and it's a good reminder, I think, to, you know, understand that, you know, they are kids, and sometimes we can't just write them off as their kids, and that we have to, you know, keep believing in them, and do the best they can, and hopefully they can believe in themselves, and hopefully great things can happen if they kind of know that they have to believe in themselves, but they also have maybe other people who trust in them and believe in them as well. So no, that was really good. And finally, Coach, what I give every guest is what I like to call like a 60-second soapbox, which is their opportunity to get out their final idea, their closing thought, or their closing message that they want the listeners to hear. It could be related to anything that you would like. So I'm going to go ahead and give you that floor, and to close with that message.
Yeah, Coach, first of all, I appreciate you allowing me to do this. I always look forward to being able to talk basketball or life or whatever on any platform. I think for me personally, and then our staff, and it's even extended beyond what I could ever imagine, was during the pandemic, and I think all of us are in the same boat. You had opportunities. You had opportunities to sit and do nothing and be miserable and feel like there's nothing going to get better, or there's opportunity for growth. And so I developed a personal growth plan that I have been able to share with some other college coaches, staffs, as well as our high school staff, and I've seen tremendous things from it. And it's just challenging yourself in 4 areas. It's mentally, physically, spiritually, and professionally. And I think once we dug into those areas, and somebody who wants to get a hold of me after this, I'll give you that information to do so. I think just having, a positive outlook. There's people that are hurting in our country right now. There's people that are going through things in our country right now, and in our country as a whole. I've tried to dismiss myself from watching the news every night, and because it's just you see so many things that are going on that, and there's kids that are hurting. There's kids that are out there that need need something in their lives that can fill their bucket and get them out of maybe what they're going through. So I would just say in general, I would challenge every coach that's listening to this, every leader that's listening to this, that there's so much responsibility right now on us with the youth right now coming up, that we've got to maybe change some mindsets and really fill them up with some things that are going to benefit them and benefit our country moving forward.
I think that it's a really good thought to keep in mind that with everything going on, that there's so much more beyond basketball that's taking place right now, and that our players need a lot from us potentially, and we could also be using this opportunity to grow and heal, or whatever the case may be. And I think that, as you're kind of mentioning, it's important to have some grace with ourselves and allow ourselves to hurt a little bit and then try and improve and try and get better from there. And I think just understanding the unique situation that we're in, like you kind of mentioned, and that it's an opportunity for us to grow and change and maybe fill our buckets with things that are going to help us and be positive for us and help us moving in the right direction. So I really like that, and I'll probably be taking you up on that myself. So 100%. And so I want to thank you again, Coach, for spending some time talking about your team, your program, tryouts, preseason, a whole lot more as well. Best of luck going forward, Coach Stamps. Best of luck with just everything. Hopefully your players are able to play, everybody's able to stay healthy, and you're able to get a season in. And so thank you again for spending some time, and good luck going forward.
Thank you so much. I appreciate all you do for, promoting basketball and having an opportunity, a platform for others to come on and share their love and what they do. So thanks again, and look forward to visiting with you in the future.
Thanks a lot, Coach. Really appreciate it. And thank you for all of you who were listening. This was another edition of the Basketball Teacher Podcast. We will see you guys next time.
Thank you for listening to another edition of the Basketball Teacher Podcast. Make sure to connect with us on YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter, or reach us directly through email at basketballteacherpodcast@gmail.com. Take care, be safe, and we'll see you next time.